bright lights of New York City illuminated the skyline, but inside a polished studio, the atmosphere was unusually electric, even for weekly commentary television. John Oliver, comfortably seated behind his desk, a characteristic smirk playing on his lips, leaned into the camera. "Tonight," he teased, "we have someone very special joining us. An actor known for portraying, shall we say, a figure of significant moral authority. A man who might just convince you that turning water into wine is less miraculous than getting through a segment on this show without a mild roasting." The audience chuckled. Then he added, "Let's welcome Jonathan Roumie." Applause echoed, but it wasn't the usual enthusiastic reception Oliver's guests received. It was tense, the kind of polite clapping that felt more like a prelude to an unexpected turn. Jonathan Roumie walked onto the stage in a well-tailored dark suit, every step deliberate. His expression was calm, poised, and held a quiet intensity, the way a person looks walking into a place where they feel a deeper purpose. He didn't wait for Oliver's opening jab. Instead, he sat down, looked directly at Oliver, and said, "John, I'm here because I think people are tired of seeing their deepest convictions treated as punchlines." The room fell uncomfortably quiet. Oliver leaned in, feigning interest. "Jonathan, I assume you're referring to our comedy, not, say, the existential dread of modern life." "Actually," Roumie fired back, "I'm talking about the luxury of mocking the sincere beliefs of everyday Americans while you deconstruct complex issues with an air of intellectual superiority and call it satire." The audience let out a collective gasp. Oliver, momentarily rattled, raised his eyebrows. "So you're suggesting comedy is the enemy?" "I'm suggesting," Jonathan said firmly, "that your brand of commentary hides behind a smug moral certainty that looks down on half the country, dismissing their faith, their traditions, their simple patriotism as inherently unsophisticated." Cheers broke out, not from the entire audience, but a noticeable section. It was clear not everyone came to see him fall. Oliver straightened in his chair. "Look, we scrutinize everyone here. Republicans, Democrats, corporations, even occasionally ourselves." "No, John," Roumie interrupted. "You scrutinize America, the America I believe in. You mock it because you don't seem to understand it, or maybe you just don't respect it anymore." That line hit like a hammer. Oliver grinned tightly, his rhythm clearly disrupted. "Let's keep things civil, Jonathan. It's a show." "Then maybe you should stick to entertainment," Roumie said quietly, but with steel. "Because when you lecture Americans on what values are acceptable, what thoughts are enlightened, that's not humor. That's cultural narrative dressed in a punchline." The camera cut to Oliver, uncharacteristically silent for a beat. The tension was no longer playful. This wasn't a late-night giggle fest. This was a deeper challenge, and Jonathan Roumie had just issued it live in front of millions. Oliver shuffled his note cards, clearly buying time. His smirk faltered just enough to betray that Jonathan had struck a nerve. "Okay," he finally said, his tone sharper now. "So you're saying commentary isn't allowed to challenge cultural norms anymore?" Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "You're not challenging cultural norms, John. You are a cultural norm. You have a nationwide platform, millions of viewers, and the backing of a major network. When you belittle the traditional values and the earnest patriotism of working-class Americans from this desk, you're not punching up, you're punching down." A low rumble of murmurs rippled through the audience. Some clapped, others whispered. Oliver leaned back, folding his arms. "You're saying I'm the bully here?" "I'm saying people are tired of cultural elites pretending they're still the underdog," he said coolly. "You mock America from a Manhattan studio with research teams and Emmy nominations. I tell stories about real people, and I know that their struggles, their beliefs are not footnotes for your monologues." Oliver laughed, but it lacked confidence. Okay. So what are these noble values we're all supposedly mocking?" "Faith, family, freedom, sincerity," Roumie said simply. "The things that built this country and guide millions of lives, while you're busy writing monologues about perceived societal flaws and calling that bravery." That got a few groans from the audience, but also a loud cheer. Oliver's face tightened. Jonathan pressed on. "You think cultural discourse is a punchline, but to millions of Americans, it's the very fabric of their lives. You think traditional patriotism is cringe. I think it's courage. That's the difference between us, John. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here because people like you keep mocking what they love." Oliver sat up straighter now, clearly rattled. "You know, Jonathan, sometimes your delivery sounds more like a sermon than a dialogue." He didn't blink. And sometimes your commentary sounds more like an indictment than an analysis. The studio was no longer laughing. There was an eerie pause. Even the crew behind the cameras looked on edge. Jonathan turned slightly to the audience. They say when you speak the truth in a room full of noise, it sounds outrageous. Well, here I am. A few people in the crowd started clapping slowly at first, then louder. Oliver raised a hand trying to recover control. Let's go to commercial. But it was too late. The fire was lit. The segment wasn't commentary anymore. It was confrontation. And Jonathan Roumie had just flipped the script on live television. The commercial break couldn't come fast enough for Oliver's production team. Behind the scenes, a flurry of producers scrambled to regroup, mouths pressed to earpieces, trying to decide whether to soften the next segment or double down. On the stage, Jonathan remained composed, glancing calmly around as makeup artists hovered nearby. None dared approach him. When the cameras went live again, Oliver attempted a reset. "We're back," he said with forced cheer. "And I'm still joined by Jonathan Roumie, who I have to say could teach a masterclass in spirited disagreement." Jonathan smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks, John. I'm just tired of watching people cheer while their own values are ridiculed." Oliver pushed forward, trying to regain rhythm. "But don't you think satire plays a vital role in a functioning democracy? Isn't it our job to question narratives?" "You don't question narratives," he replied smoothly. "You enforce a very specific one. And you don't speak truth to power. You mock the beliefs of the powerless who refuse to adopt your worldview." That stung. Oliver shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That's not fair. I've criticized all sides." Jonathan didn't hesitate. "Yes, with velvet gloves for some and a sledgehammer for others. Your audience laughs, but half the country feels like they're being laughed at, not with. That's not satire. That's cultural gatekeeping." The crowd tensed again. Oliver tried another tack. "So you want comedians and commentators to be neutral?" "I want them to be honest," he said. "And if you can't be honest about your own biases, at least don't pretend to speak for all Americans, because you don't. You speak for a studio audience in New York and LA. I speak for people whose earnestness you dismiss." His voice had weight. The mood in the room had shifted from banter to reckoning. Oliver leaned back and exhaled, trying to laugh it off. "Jonathan, do you ever take a break from being this intense?" He smirked. "Not when the stakes are this high." And in that moment, it was clear this wasn't just a guest appearance. It was an ambush on comfort zones, a challenge to the culture of smugness that had ruled commentary for decades. Jonathan had entered enemy territory and refused to play nice. The audience didn't know whether to cheer or hold their breath. But one thing was certain: no one would forget this night. Oliver's smile had all but vanished. The usual rhythm of dominance, a well-timed jab, a clever quip, audience laughter, had failed him. Jonathan Roumie wasn't here to entertain. He was here to confront, and the energy in the room knew it. Oliver tried a last pivot. "So what would your America look like, Jonathan? One without shows like mine? Without cultural criticism? Without humor?" Jonathan leaned forward, his voice cool, unshaken. "My America looks like this. You can say whatever you want, but you don't get to mock faith, family, and patriotism and expect zero pushback. Cultural criticism? I welcome it. But what you do isn't criticism, it's derision. There's a difference." The audience was now silent. It wasn't awkward, it was electric. The kind of silence that follows truth. Oliver stammered slightly. "Well, I think we have a difference in opinion on what comedy and commentary are." "Exactly," he replied. "You think commentary is safe when it only targets one perspective. I think real commentary risks offending everyone, not just the people you already disagree with." A producer off stage signaled frantically. This segment was supposed to be 6 minutes. It was heading into 10, but cutting it short now would only confirm what some watching already suspected, that Oliver couldn't handle a real debate. Jonathan, unfazed, continued. "You want to joke about America? Fine. But when you make your audience laugh by belittling the very people who value tradition, who work hard in quiet communities, who cling to their faith, you're not punching up. You're punching them in the gut." Oliver tried to interrupt, but he held the floor. "And then you turn around and act like the brave truth teller. No, John, you're not brave for mocking people who don't clap back. You're comfortable, and this country doesn't need more comfortable people pretending they're courageous." The crowd shifted. A few applause lines broke through. One voice yelled, "Let him talk!" Oliver blinked. Jonathan stared straight at him. "You sit behind a desk in a climate-controlled studio. I've been on film sets with people from all walks of life. I've talked to families trying to instill values in their kids against a torrent of cultural mockery. And when I speak for them, when I try to understand them, people like you roll your eyes. That's what I came here to say. Not everyone finds your insight funny. A long pause, then scattered applause again, louder this time. Oliver took a sip of water, visibly rattled. This wasn't the showdown he had planned, but it was the one that was happening. The producers considered cutting to commercial, but something about the tension on set, the unraveling of control, was too potent to interrupt. For years, John Oliver had orchestrated the late-night stage like a maestro. But tonight he was playing defense in Jonathan Roumie. He was conducting the storm. Oliver cleared his throat, forcing a grin. So, Jonathan, you believe it's dangerous to make fun of powerful cultural figures, but only if they lean your direction? He didn't blink. No, I think it's dangerous to punch down while pretending you're punching up. There's nothing rebellious about a millionaire host mocking a working-class dad in a small town because his values don't align with yours. The audience shifted again. Some folded arms, others leaned in. The usual partisan reflexes were being tested. Oliver chuckled nervously. Well, I do mock many figures, guilty as charged. Jonathan tilted his head. Sure, but while you're mocking a figure, you're also mocking the people who feel like their sincerity has been ignored their whole lives. The people who hold on to beliefs not because they're politically expedient, but because no one else seems to value them. Not you, not mainstream media, not Hollywood, he paused. And then, when I speak for them, you paint me as dangerous. Oliver tried to soften the mood with sarcasm. Wow, so now I'm the cultural boogeyman. You said it, not me, he replied, his smile sharp. The audience laughed reluctantly, tensely, but it was laughter with a different tone, one of acknowledgement. Jonathan had flipped the dynamic. Oliver tried to regain ground. Okay, let's say everything you're saying is true. What would you have me do? Stop being funny? Apologize for being a progressive? Jonathan shrugged. I'd have you listen just once to someone outside your carefully curated bubble, and maybe, just maybe, realize that not everyone who disagrees with you is a punchline. Silence again. Not awkward, just raw, he added, his voice quieter, more grounded. You have influence, John. Millions listen to you, and right now America is breaking into two cultural countries. If all you do is feed one side and humiliate the other, you're not a commentator anymore. You're a divider with a monologue. The camera slowly panned. The expressions in the audience had shifted. No more smirks, no more shallow chuckles, just thought. Oliver leaned back, subdued. You came here swinging. Jonathan nodded. I came here honest. Oliver straightened in his chair, visibly regrouping. The rhythm of the show had slipped away from him, and he knew it. But he wasn't ready to wave the white flag. Not yet. Well, Jonathan, he said, forcing levity back into his tone, you're certainly not afraid to throw punches on national TV. But do you ever worry that your version of honesty sounds a lot like anger? Jonathan didn't hesitate. No, John, what you're hearing isn't anger, it's urgency. There's a difference. He leaned forward, his hands folded neatly, gaze sharp. You sit in a studio built by a massive network. I came up fighting for every inch of space I've gotten as an actor. So when I speak, it's not rage, it's responsibility. Because if I don't say it, nobody will. Oliver opened his mouth, but he cut in, not with aggression, but with control. You call it anger because it makes it easier to dismiss. It's the same thing cultural gatekeepers always do. Label someone passionate as hysterical or extreme so they don't have to listen. Oliver blinked, caught off guard by his precision. Jonathan continued, but people watching this, the ones you don't usually talk to, they're not outraged because I said something controversial. They're relieved because finally someone is sitting across from you who isn't trying to earn your approval. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, not loud but unmistakable. Jonathan's tone softened slightly, but his conviction didn't waver. You say you satirize. Sure, but look closer. You mock belief. You mock tradition. You mock struggle. Unless it fits a narrative you've approved. That's not bravery. That's branding. Oliver looked toward the crew, uncertain. For the first time in his career, he was outmaneuvered on his own turf. And by the way, Jonathan added, I don't care if you're a progressive, but don't pretend you're the voice of all truth when half the country sees you as the guy who laughs at them for sport. The silence was deafening. He glanced to the audience. You don't have to agree with me, but if you're willing to listen, maybe you'll finally hear what millions of Americans have been quietly believing for years. Oliver gave a slow nod. You came prepared. Jonathan offered a small smile. I came for the people whose quiet conviction never gets invited to sit in this chair. Oliver exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair, the grin fading into something closer to unease. The crowd was silent, as if waiting to see whether he'd recover or retreat. You know, he began, choosing his words more cautiously now, it's easy to throw stones at someone in this chair. It's harder to understand what we're trying to do. Make people think, give them something to process in chaotic times. Jonathan nodded, but didn't give him room to hide in sentimentality. Humor and commentary are powerful things, John. They can build bridges or burn them. And when the laughter and critique only ever punch one direction, eventually someone punches back. The crowd let out a slight gasp, not dramatic but charged. Oliver attempted to steer back into safer territory. Well, if we're talking about commentary and fairness, where's the line, Jonathan? Should I stop making fun of certain figures less? Tell fewer jokes about absurdity? Jonathan tilted his head, his tone calm but cutting. No, you can tell all the jokes you want. Just don't pretend it's harmless. When it feeds a culture that labels people who disagree as stupid, naive, or backward. That's not humor. That's arrogance disguised as enlightenment. His words hit with the weight of something unsaid for too long. Oliver was quiet, absorbing the shift in the room, the friction, the hesitation, the unspoken agreement from unexpected corners of his own audience. Jonathan added, there are millions of Americans who feel culturally invisible. And when the only time they hear their values mentioned on TV is in a punchline, they stop laughing. They tune out, or worse, they tune into rage. That line echoed even off camera. Oliver looked toward the audience, then back at him. So what do you want me to do? Stop the show? Change who I am? Jonathan shook his head. I want you to be aware of the weight your voice carries because people are listening. And they're tired of being told by millionaires that their lives, their faith, their choices are a joke. A beat of silence. You mock America's soul, John, he added, his voice low, unwavering. I try to understand it. The crowd buzzed, not in laughter this time, but in reckoning. The studio, usually filled with laughter and well-timed applause, felt like a courtroom now. John Oliver sat straighter than before, less the confident host and more the witness under cross-examination. He cleared his throat. You say you understand America, Jonathan, but let's be honest, your version of America looks different than mine. It's traditional, it's often faith-driven, it's perhaps less cynical. Jonathan's expression didn't flinch. No, John, my version of America is sincere. It's built by people who value community and humility, who don't have the luxury of dissecting culture over lattes. Some audience members chuckled nervously. He went on, it's not exclusive, it's just not curated. And that scares cultural elites like you. Because if you really acknowledge the millions of Americans you mock or ignore, you would have to admit your platform is one-sided. Oliver raised an eyebrow. So you want more traditional voices on commentary shows? No, he said, I want honesty. If your show's mission is to be a progressive megaphone, say it. But don't dress it up as objective satire when your punchlines always land on the same people. The crowd was listening more closely now, some shifting in their seats, others nodding. Oliver leaned in, tone softening. Do you really believe I hate this country? Jonathan paused, choosing his words like a scalpel. I think you've forgotten what it feels like to truly need this country, its bedrock values. You live above the fray. The rest of us are still in it. He blinked. That one hit deep. I'm not asking you to become conservative, John, he continued. I'm asking you to stop pretending that heartland Americans are the punchline of every joke you tell just because it earns a cheer in a New York studio. He glanced at the cameras. Because America isn't just watching, it's remembering. Oliver's trademark smirk didn't return. He looked out toward the crowd and then back to him, quieter than before. Well, Jonathan, tonight you made your voice heard. Jonathan gave a small nod. And I didn't need a script to do it. The camera stayed tight on Oliver's face. A man known for quick wit now grasping for footing. For a brief moment, he looked not like the king of weekly commentary, but like someone facing a truth he hadn't prepared for. Jonathan turned slightly to address the audience, not just in the studio, but the millions watching from home. This isn't about comedy, he said, his voice firmer now. This is about cultural power, narrative control. You mock those with traditional beliefs like we're relics, but we're the ones building strong families, cultivating communities, holding on to faith. He pointed lightly toward Oliver, not in aggression, but in challenge. Meanwhile, cultural elites like you sit in million-dollar studios, lecturing the rest of us on truth and justice without ever acknowledging the consequences of your narratives. A ripple of discomfort ran through the crowd. Not everyone agreed, but no one could deny the intensity in his words. Oliver tried to pivot. So your solution is what? To silence commentary, to shut down cultural dissent? Jonathan shook his head. No, my solution is accountability. You want to mock? Fine, but don't act shocked when someone finally stands up and says, "You don't speak for me because, John, you don't." His eyes locked with his. You represent a bubble. I represent the people who've been outside it for far too long. There was no applause sign needed now. The studio erupted, some in cheers, some in stunned silence. A young man in the second row stood up and clapped slowly, drawing others to join. Others remained seated, arms crossed. Oliver chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Well, Jonathan, I'll give you this. You've brought more heat to this stage than most politicians we've had on. He smiled slightly. I'm not here to be polite. I'm here to be real. The producers backstage were scrambling now, phones lighting up, segment directors signaling the control room. Social media was already ablaze. #Oliver vs. Roumie was trending within minutes. Oliver leaned back. One more question, he said. If you had this stage, this exact seat, what would you say to America? Jonathan stared into the camera. I'd say this. They've laughed at you. They've dismissed you. But they can't ignore you forever. Because we're not backing down. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the atmosphere thickened. No longer just a talk show, but a battleground of ideals. Oliver folded his hands, trying to reclaim control. You really believe you're the future of American discourse? Jonathan didn't miss a beat. No, I believe I'm the correction to the current one. A few gasps from the audience. One woman near the front clutched her pearls. Another whispered, he's not wrong. Jonathan leaned forward. The reason this moment matters isn't because I'm an actor with traditional leanings. It's because I showed up, and too many of us haven't. We let pop culture call us backward, naive, irrelevant, and we stayed quiet. He turned slightly toward the live audience. Not anymore. Oliver glanced to the side, visibly wrestling with how to respond. A seasoned performer, but one now confronting an opponent who didn't play by late-night rules. He wasn't laughing, and he wasn't scared. Jonathan, he finally said, choosing each word carefully. There's a difference between being bold and being divisive. He raised an eyebrow. And there's a difference between being funny and being dishonest. Boom! The crowd buzzed with electricity. Phones were out recording. Comments were flooding in online by the second. X, TikTok, YouTube clips were already being clipped. He sat back, arms resting confidently. I didn't come here to win an argument. I came here to remind millions watching that their voice still matters, even when people like you say otherwise. Oliver sighed, half amused, half defeated. Well, congratulations. You've just turned this into the most viral show we've aired in years. Jonathan smiled, his eyes sharp. Good, because America's sincerity has been waiting to speak for a long time. As the credits rolled, the tension still hung in the air, but there was no mistaking it. Jonathan Roumie had come into the lion's den and left with its roar in his hands. And there you have it, a confrontation that shook the room and echoed far beyond the studio walls. Jonathan Roumie didn't just challenge John Oliver. He challenged a cultural stronghold, unafraid and unapologetic. Whether you agree or not, one thing is clear. Voices that were once dismissed are now speaking louder than ever. If you believe in fearless conversation, in standing your ground, even when it's uncomfortable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next showdown could be even bigger.